Chapter 4, Part 2, China. We're going to start with the Han Dynasty. This is a painted silk banner from the tomb of Dai Hoi Furan. This is Lady Dai with attendants. In 1971, workers digging an air raid shelter for a hospital near Changsha unearthed the tomb of Zin Sui, as well as the tombs of her husband and her son. In the tomb, there were 4 coffins of decreasing sizes enclosed in one another. The first and outermost coffin is painted black, the color of death in the underworld. All of the painted images are sealed inside this coffin, and thus designed not for an outside viewer, but for the deceased, and concern the themes of death and rebirth, protection in the afterlife, and immortality. The second coffin has a black background, but is painted with a pattern of stylized clouds, with protective deities and auspicious animals. A tiny figure, the deceased woman, is emerging at the bottom center of the end of the coffin. The third coffin is a different color scheme in iconography. It's shining red, the color of immortality. It includes divine animals and a winged immortal flanking 3-peaked Mount Kunlun, which is a prime symbol of eternal happiness. Inside this tomb, on top of the fourth and innermost coffin, the excavators found a patterned silk banner about 2 meters long, which is this banner right here. Here are some close-ups of the coffins we've been talking about. So this silk banner is over 6 feet long, and it's in the innermost of the 4 nesting coffins. Scholars are still debating the function of this banner. They know it has connections with the afterlife. One thought is that it is a name banner used to identify the dead during mourning ceremonies. Another is that it was a burial shroud intended to aid the soul in its passage to the afterlife. The banner features the earliest known portrait in Chinese painting. We can divide this banner into several registers. In the lowest register, we see Lady Dai in an embroidered silk robe leaning on a staff. This is the earliest example of a painted portrait of a specific individual in China. She stands on a platform along with her servants, 2 in front and 3 behind. Dragons frame the scene on either side. Their white and pink bodies loop through a bai, which is a disc with a hole thought to represent the sky. This is an image of her in the afterlife, enjoying the immortal comforts of her tomb as she ascends toward the heavens. In the register below this, we see sacrificial funerary rituals, offerings of food and wine. In the midground, we see seated mourners lining up in rows. You can notice that the figure of Lady Dai is seen in the pattern on the silk that matches the robe that she is wearing in that scene. Toward the top, we actually reach the more heavenly realms. We have 2 men facing each other and guarding the gate to the heavenly realm. Directly above the 2 men, at the very top of the banner, we see a deity with a human head and a dragon body. 2 men beneath a large bell performing a funeral ceremony. This summoning of the soul attempts to call the part of the soul headed on the perilous journey to paradise back to the tomb for its own protection. One part of the soul, the Po, stayed with the body. Another, the Hun, undertook a long, perilous journey to paradise. I feel that this drawing is a lot easier to see some of these details, so you can kind of see what we were talking about. You can see there's Lady Dai all dressed up, and we've got her attendants behind and in front. We've got the dragons. We can see the dragon heads here and here. And then we're talking right now about this heavenly realm up here, and we have the 2 figures guarding this entrance to the heavenly realm. So we have a toad standing on a crescent moon that flanks the dragon human deity. On the right, we see a three-legged crow with a pink sun. The moon and the sun are emblematic of the supernatural realm above this human world. Dragons and other immortal beings populate the sky. Lower down, we see two giant black fish, a red snake, a pair of blue goats, and another earthly deity. The beings in the underworld symbolize water and earth. They indicate an underground domain below the human world. So here's a close-up. We've got the frog and the moon. There's the crow and the sun. And we've got two dragon deities here. The two guards to this heavenly realm here. And we see all sorts of other creatures and deities there. Here's a close-up of that central section. We again have Lady Day and her attendants, framed again by dragons. This is an image of what her tomb looked like. You notice that there is a meal being presented. This is where she was supposed to have her meal after her soul goes on. This is where she's supposed to have a meal after she has emerged into the afterlife. So like many other cultures, we have the idea that you have to take everything with you. So this is literally the food that she needs for the afterlife. So this is an image that kind of shows the tomb. So we have, again, all of the sarcophagi nestling in amongst one another, and then surrounding we have all of these grave goods. So we've got food and provisions for the afterlife. Other provisions found were cushions, an armrest, her walking stick. Lady Day was about 50 years old when she died, but it has all of the comforts of home in this tomb. So we have this magnificent tomb with the sarcophagi and the banner that we've talked about. Now the other interesting aspect is her body itself. So I'm going to give you a quick warning that I'm going to show the body of Lady Day, and that's because it is kind of important, because when she was unearthed in 1971, she had died in 163 BC. So 163 BC to 1971. And interestingly enough, when she was found, her skin was still soft to the touch. There were no signs of rigor mortis. Her arms and legs can still bend. Her internal organs are intact, and there is still blood in her veins. This was a big question for those who found her, is why was her body still so well preserved after all these years? So they actually did an autopsy on her more than 2,100 years after her death. They were able to reconstruct how she died. They were able to tell aspects of her life, even tell that her blood type is type A. The autopsy of Lady Day is arguably the most complete medical profile ever compiled on an ancient individual. It was performed December 14th, 1972 by the doctors at the Hunan Provincial Medical Institute. Here is an image of the autopsy at the time. This is a reconstruction of what they think she would have looked like. So, why was she so well preserved? Well, she was wrapped in 20 layers of silk. She was laid to rest, again, within the series of 4 nestled coffins of decreasing size that we talked about. Also, to keep out air and water, her tomb was packed with charcoal. The top was sealed with several feet of clay. That you can see the layers there in this image. So the tomb being watertight, airtight, means that a lot of the bacteria that normally breaks down a body would have actually been killed or eliminated from the scene. Archaeologists also found traces of mercury inside her coffin. So that might have been used as an antibacterial agent after her death. There was also an unknown liquid there. Her body was soaked in. Again, they think that this was some form to try to keep out the bacteria. Lady Day was a wealthy woman, a powerful woman who used that power. She also was able to eat very well. She ate things such as scorpion soup, which was a delicacy of the time. Unfortunately, she also gained quite a bit of weight by the time of her death at the age of 50. We see in the depiction on the banner that she's using a cane. And that cane is actually also in the tomb itself. Because of the autopsy, we know that she had coronary thrombosis and arterial sclerosis. So she lived a fairly sedentary lifestyle. She also had a fused disc in her spine, so she would have had severe back pain and difficulty walking. She also had internal parasites, likely from eating undercooked food. She suffered from clogged arteries, heart disease, osteoporosis, and gallstones. All of these conditions contributed to her untimely death. Flying horse poised on one leg on a swallow. This is from another tomb. This is the tomb of Governor General Zhang at Hui at Gansu. This was discovered in 1969 in a Han tomb at Leitai in Wuhui that belonged to General Zhang of Zhangyi. Locals had been told to dig an air raid shelter in case of a war with the Soviet Union, and it was in that dig that they found this. They found a chamber, which was actually under part of a monastery, that held a group of over 200 bronze figurines of men, horses, and chariots. Unfortunately, they put these figures in bags and took them all home. Thankfully, the authorities were called and many of these pieces were returned. So let's talk about the flying horse. We can see this horse has the two right legs stepping forward and the two left ones backwards. Why you think, well, this isn't how horses run. There actually are some breeds that do run this way. This is most likely a celestial or blood sweating breed. So let's talk about that. This is a breed of horse. It was a mixed blood horse from the Hexi horse breed from inland China, and the Menggu breed from Mongolia, and the Hangsu breed from ancient Afghanistan. 3 types of horses interbred to create this celestial horse. These celestial horses were highly prized as marks of status. This breed of horse was being bred in the Fergana Valley of eastern Uzbekistan, and was brought back by an expedition sent by Emperor Han Wudi in 104 BC. You'll also notice that it is called flying horse poised on one leg on a swallow. Now, scholars will point out that the bird is in fact not a swallow. Now, as I said, this is celestial or blood-sweating horse, so let's talk about that. The horses supposedly sweated blood. Evidently, this was caused by a parasite which burrowed under the skin in the region of the shoulder or the back and produced little swellings which burst and bled. This sweating blood horses were also recorded by the Silk Road travelers in the 19th and 20th centuries. So this was evidently a fairly common thing on horses in this region. Now let's talk about the Wei civilization. This is the colossal Buddha at Shangzi. It was commissioned in 460 by Emperor Wen Cheng. His father had persecuted Buddhists, and so his son, Emperor Wen Cheng, decided to atone for his father by carving 53 caves along 1 mile of cliffs. Originally, there was a rock-cut temple facade in front of this Buddha. This is the first massive-scale Buddha in China. The Ashnisha, that knot of hair on the head, symbolizing superior spiritual knowledge, as well as the mudra, remember that's the hand position, in this case signifying meditation. So we have the long ears of the Buddha, symbolizing that he can hear all of the cries from people around the world. We have the hands in meditation. We have the top knot. It was also originally flanked by a pair of smaller standing Buddhas. You can actually see those square holes in the background. right here. You can see it in this image as well. There's a close-up. You can definitely see the long ears and the top knot in here as well. So those square holes in the back, actually there were large beams, wooden beams, that held up a protective wooden facade. Unfortunately, those are no longer around. Unfortunately, this is a very soft sandstone rock, which is why so much of his lower parts have kind of been withered away by the winds. Their faces, however, have been restored in recent years. You'll also notice that these have a less Chinese facade. The drapery of their robes is more Central Asian than Chinese. There are 5 caves, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, that are collectively known as the 5 Caves by monk Tanyo, or Tanyo Uku. These were excavated during around the 460s AD. Each of these caves featured a colossal Buddha. Tanyo was appointed by the Northern Wei Emperor as the superintendent of the monks, in charge of planning and supervising the excavation of the caves. This project was successful mainly due to the generous and uninterrupted imperial support and patronage. Scholars speculate that the 5 Buddhas have been sculpted in the likeness of the 5 previous Northern Wei emperors. The colossal Buddha images in each cave were equated with the first 5 emperors of Beiwei, thus emphasizing the political and economic role that the court imposed upon Buddhism. There's that close-up again. And here's another image. So we still have one of the Buddhas on the side. Unfortunately, the one on the left side has deteriorated too much to restore. This is part of a hand scroll, the admonitions of the instructress to the ladies of the palace. This illustrates text by a Confucian poet, Zhang Hui, and explains the virtues of a good wife and the behavior expected of women attached to the court, including those in the imperial harem. It is painted on silk, woven in long, narrow bands, about 12 inches wide and 30 feet long. It is rolled between spindles and meant to be read segment by segment. There are very fine line details, especially on the faces. The seal or colophon inscriptions, or poems, usually in red, indicate the ownership. Later connoisseurs also add their own seals. This painting illustrates a political parody written by Zhang Hui. The parody takes a moralizing tone, attacking the excessive behavior of an empress. The protagonist is the court instructress, who guides the ladies of the imperial harem on correct behavior. In total, 9 scenes were depicted on the scroll. Unfortunately, the first 2 scenes are now missing, as well as the text of the first scene. The inscriptions and seals on the scroll date back to the 8th century, when this copy of the Gukazi original was probably painted. In 1860, during the Second Opium War, the painting was looted by British troops from the Old Summer Palace and came to the collection of the British Museum. So here are some of the other scenes. So again, you see all of the red seals indicating past owners of this work. Here are some other scenes. Again, these are showing women what their role is supposed to be. There are some more. We have the big red seals. We have the black writing down the side indicating the text. Another image from that scroll. Now let's go to the Tang Dynasty. This is Western Paradise. It's a section of a wall painting in Dunhuang in Gansu province. This is the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas, also known as Mogo or Magao. This is located in the desert, about 15 miles southeast of the town of Danhuang in northern western China. By the late 4th century, the area had become a busy desert crossroads of the caravan routes of the Silk Road linking China and the West. Traders, pilgrims, and other travelers stopped at the oasis to secure provisions, pray for the journey ahead, or give thanks for their survival. In the year 366, monks carved the first caves into the cliffs, stretching about 1 mile along the Daquan River. There are about 492 cave temples, ranging in date from the 5th through the 13th centuries. During the Tang Dynasty, Pure Land Buddhism became very popular. This promoted the Buddha Amitabha, who helped the believer achieve rebirth into this Western paradise that you see depicted here. Even sinners are permitted here. The sinners are seated with closed lotus buds, listening to the heavenly sounds and sermon of the Buddha, who is then purifying them. You can see the Buddha seated here in the center, very large, surrounded by people and, of course, buildings behind him. In Pure Land Buddhism, the faithful were promised a place in the Western paradise of the Amitabha, or the infinite light. This was an opulent, courtly place. The Amitabha Buddha is seated among bodhisattvas in the celestial garden filled with bodhisattvas, devotees, musicians, and others. The buildings in the back are mirroring the popular architecture of the day. The Magao caves at Danghuang were reclaimed from the encroaching Gobi Desert beginning in the early 20th century, but their conservation is an ongoing challenge. There are natural threats like sandstorms and rainwater. The cave's delicate murals face damage caused by tourists, hundreds of thousands per year, sometimes up to 6,000 per day, depending on the time of year. This adds dangerous levels of carbon dioxide and humidity to the air, which helps promote peeling of the paint from the wall. However, they are working continuously to preserve these paintings in the caves. Here's an image of the Magao caves. Guanyin as the guide of souls. Here we have Guanyin, which is short for Guan Xinyin, which is a bodhisattva in Mahayan Buddhism, often associated with compassion and mercy. Guanyin is often portrayed as a woman, but technically is beyond gender, and so can be depicted as both male or female. So Guanyin is leading the woman there in the back. So Guanyin is this figure here, this woman in the back. So Guanyin is leading the woman to Amitabha, the Buddhist paradise. Guanyin is often referred to as one of the most widely beloved Buddhist divinities, mainly based on its power and loving compassion. They are worshipped in Buddhism, Taoism, as well as Chinese folk religion. There are lots of stories and legends surrounding Guanyin. They also portray an important role in the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. Guanyin is also known by other names. The Japanese call them Kanon or Kwanon, or more formally, Kanzeon, while in Thailand they are called Kwan Temples are dedicated to them throughout the South and East Asia, especially in China. So we have Guanyin as the bodhisattva that is leading the figure to the land of paradise, the Pure Land or Western Paradise. We see that they are floating on clouds there on the base. So they're floating or flying through the air. Guanyin is holding a censer and a banner. So we see the banner here. This is the censer. That is a container which incense is burned. This is a typical type of banner found in the caves at Magao, with a triangular headpiece and streamers. The woman appears to be very wealthy. She has gold hairpins. Her garment is very ornate. She looks very much like figures that were found in actual Chinese tombs. We think that this painting dates to the late 9th or early 10th centuries. Emperor Wu Di. Emperor Wu Di was the 7th emperor of the Han Dynasty in China, ruling from 141 to 87 BC. His reign lasted 54 years, a record not broken until the reign of Kangxi, more than 1800 years later, resulted in vast territorial expansion, development of a strong centralized state, resulting from reorganization, including promotion of Confucian doctrines. Yan Lebin is the artist here, and he served as prime minister to the emperor. Was very skilled at painting, architecture, and sculpture. His works are oftentimes included with moral lessons. So this is a piece we have at the museum. This camel is again from the Tang Dynasty. But I thought I'd actually talk a little bit about the camel itself. The Bactrian or two-hummed camel was used to haul trade goods along the Silk Road. The Silk Road, remember, that is the trade route going from China into the West. Extremely important at this time. So objects such as this were made from a light colored earthenware clay using molds. If you look very closely, you can actually see some of the lines from the molds. And then the sections were joined together. They're typically hollow or had holes to prevent unwanted distortion when the object was fired. So it's polychrome, which is multicolored. The glaze is called sankai, literally 3 colors. It's a lead glaze with mineral pigments, copper for green, iron for brown and amber, and cobalt for blue. They're fired at temperatures of around 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius. These types of figures were very popular in the late 600s and mid 700s. This would have been a typical object that was placed in a tomb for the wealthy. Now let's talk about the Song Dynasty. Travelers amid mountains and streams. Fan Quan, which is a hermit and mountain dweller, he was renowned for the sternness of his character. He lived as a recluse, was a poet and artist. He became very disenchanted with human affairs, and so, again, was a recluse, lived on his own, turned away from the world to seek spiritual enlightenment. In this painting, we see him express a cosmic vision of man's harmonious existence in a vast but orderly universe. This is the Neo-Confucian search for an absolute truth in nature, as well as self-cultivation. This landscape really epitomizes the early Northern Song monumental style of landscape painting. He was a master of the raindrop or wrinkle brushstroke, which was used inside ink contour lines to shade, model, and texture forms, giving them greater mass. So we have these peaks along the Yangtze River in the Anhuan province west of Shanghai. At the very base of the mountain, you can see a pack horse train emerging from the wood at the base of this precipice. Here is a close-up so you can actually see it. Just the tiniest of little details here. These are so small and insignificant compared to the grandeur that he is depicting with nature. The idea that we as humans and everything we do as humans is just minute. At the very top here, we can actually see a temple, small and minute compared to that which is in nature. Here's a detail of the cliff itself. Fan Quan uses an incisive thickening and thinning, contour strokes, texture dots, and ink wash to create this masterpiece. Strong, sharp brushstrokes depict the knotted trunks of the large trees. Detailed brushwork delineate the foliage and the fir trees, silhouetted along the upper edge of the ledge in the middle distance. Huining, the 6th Chan patriarch, chopping bamboo at the moment of enlightenment. Liang Kai was a Chan Buddhist living as a hermit cloistered in a remote mountain retreat. This is illustrating a Zen parable regarding Huining, the sixth patriarch of Zen, or Chan in Chinese, who suddenly found enlightenment as he was about to split a bamboo branch for firewood. So the idea is that he passes beyond all limits of rationality and receives enlightenment while chopping this bamboo. And we get this sense of suddenness by the brushstrokes. They're quick and short, and we get the idea that this is a sudden happening. He has an energy in his brushstroke that we really get this sense that Huining is about to chop this bamboo. The tree trunks on the left are rendered in a calligraphic technique known as flying white. A dry brush is moved rapidly across the surface of the paper so that white spaces are left between the light ink streaks. Now we're in the Yuan dynasty. A sheep and a goat. So this is by Zhao Mingfu. He's an 11th generation descendant of the first Song emperor. Favorite of Kublai Khan, master calligrapher, painter of horses. So we really get the sense of the difference between this fluffy sheep and goat, both of which have a fantastic fur on this image. Zhao Mingfu was a preeminent painter and calligrapher during this time. He is a versatile and subtle artist. He balanced mood and posture. We have these two animals. They're turning their heads back toward each other to create this open but unified composition. In the inscription at the left of the painting, he states his motivation for creating this work. Translated, I have painted horses before, but I have never painted sheep or goats. So when Zhongxing requested a painting, I playfully drew these for him from life. Though I cannot get close to the ancient masters, I have managed somewhat to capture their essential spirit. There are seals of several Ming and Qing dynasty collectors, especially those of the Qianlong Emperor, who once owned the scroll. There is part of an ancient poem about sheep, as on the frontispiece at right, which reads, Divine likeness of sheep in motion and repose. Zhao descended from the Song imperial family and served the Mongols as an official in the Ministry of War as well as other agencies. Kublai Khan and other late Mongol emperors admired his painting and continued to promote and reward him, offering him the position of president of the Hanlin Academy, the most prestigious body of scholars in China. Zhao realized that his patrons loved themes related to animals, so he produced paintings of horses, sheep, goats, among other animals. He also appreciated artistic freedom, condemned what he perceived to be the overly restrictive standards of the Song Imperial Academy of Painting. Scholars at the time condemned Zhao for renouncing his own heritage and serving the, quote, barbarians. But he defended himself by arguing that each individual had to decide on his own what was best for China, adding that the Mongols had unified and brought peace to China after centuries of disunity and disorder. Here we can zoom in, see the wonderful images of the sheep and the goat. Again, the text is in black and the red stamps are various owners. Now for the Ming Dynasty. Shang Sai. This is Guan Yu captures an enemy general. Shang Sai is a native of Shouxing in the Zhejiang province. He's originally a folk painter. He was invited to become a resident painter at court for the Emperor Xuanzang of the Ming Dynasty. He became a favorite of the emperor and was promoted from court painter to commander of the guards in embroidered coats, which is kind of like the Secret Service. He painted landscapes as well as figures. He was also known for his flowers and birds. He did a lot of large-scale historical paintings. So Guan Yu is a deity in Chinese folk religion, a bodhisattva in Buddhism, and a guardian deity in Taoism. Guan Yi, so he is the guy in the blue-green robe with his knee up. That is a position that other bodhisattvas are often portrayed in. This is a historical story about Guan Yu as the general in the Three Kingdoms period. He is shown questioning Pang Di, the commander-in-chief of the enemy army. So Guan Yu is revered as a folk legend, as a war god. Pang Di is also a famous general. The former appears majestic and the later defiant in this struggle for power that they have. There's a dramatic tension in this piece. We also notice that there's this large triangle to give emphasis to the theme of justice facing off evil. The two main protagonists are also larger and have a greater physical stature than the other figures in this painting. So the Ming Emperor established a new kiln. There was a ceramic industry there that started in 1004 CE. It is known for a very fine porcelain. This hard, fine ceramic paste is made from volcanic porcelain to stone clay containing quartz, kaolin, feldspar, and other clays rich in kaolin. When these clays are heated in kilns at a high temperature, we're talking 1100 to 1300 Celsius, they develop these needle-shaped mullite crystals. And so there's almost a glass forming inside the clay. The cobalt blue glazes that you see here actually come from the Mongols that had discovered this blue in Kashan, Persia. The blue comes from water and cobalt oxide. They're painted as an underglaze onto the surface of the unfired vessel, then covered with a layer of white glaze and fired in the kiln. The dragons that you see portrayed here, they bring rain. They control water. They're also the emblem of the emperor. They represent power and good luck. If you see dragons with 5 claws, like you see here, see the 5 claws, that actually references royalty. These kilns at Jingdezhen became the main production center for the large-scale porcelain exports that we see going to Europe. These kaolin-produced wares have a strength because of that material when it's added into the clay. It also enhances the whiteness of it. Okay, so this is a chest, again, from the Ming Dynasty, and it's a lacquered chest. So the lacquer is a resin made from the highly toxic sap of the Rus vernicula tree, which is native to the area, and it's a close relative of poison ivy. So lacquer is basically a natural plastic. It's resistant to water, acid, and to a certain degree heat. Raw lacquer is collected annually by extracting sap through notches cut in the trees. It's then heated to remove excess moisture and impurities. This purified lacquer can then be applied to the surface of nearly any object, or it can be built up to create something. Once coated with a thin layer of lacquer, the object is placed in a warm, humid, draft-free cabinet to dry. A high-quality lacquer object may require 30 or more coats. Its production is time-consuming and costly. Each coat can take up to 1 week to dry. Now let's talk about the Qing Dynasty and Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is a large precinct of red walls, yellow glazed roof tiles, located in the heart of the Chinese capital, Beijing. Measures 961 meters in length, 753 meters in width. Composed of more than 90 palace compounds, including 98 buildings, surrounded by a moat as wide as 52 meters. It was the political and ritual center of China for over 500 years. After its completion in 1420, the Forbidden City was home to 24 emperors, their families and servants, during the Ming and Qing dynasties. The last occupant who was also the last emperor of Imperial China, was Puyi, who was expelled in 1925 when the precinct was transformed into the Palace Museum. The construction of the Forbidden City was the result of a scandalous coup d'etat planned by Zhu Di, the fourth son of the Ming Dynasty's founder, Zhu Huangzang, that made him the Qingzhou Emperor, his official title, in 1402. In order to solidify his power, he moved the capital, as well as his own army, from Nanjing in the southeast China to Beijing, creating a new empire. So the layout follows the ideal cosmic order as found in Confucian ideology. The outer court is reserved for men, while the inner court is the domestic space dedicated to the imperial family. The inner court includes palaces in the northern part of the Forbidden City. Here, three of the most important palaces align with the city's central axis. The Emperor's residence, known as the Palace of Heavenly Purity, is located to the south, while the Empress's residence, the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, is to the north. This is the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Palace of Heavenly Purity was the grand palace building symbolizing the Emperor's supreme status. It was too large for conducting private activities comfortably, so the 18th century Emperor Yongzheng moved his residence to the smaller Hall of Mental Cultivation to the west, and the Palace of Heavenly Purity became a space for ceremonial use. The residences of the emperor's consorts flank the three major palaces in the inner court. Each side contains 6 identical walled palace compounds, forming the shape of the Kun, one of the 8 trigrams of the ancient Chinese philosophy. It is the symbol of mother and earth. It's a metaphor for feminine roles. However, all of this changed when Empress Dowager Cixi renovated the Palace of Eternal Spring and the Palace of Gathered Elegance in the west part of the inner court for her 40th and 50th birthdays, respectively. This renovation transformed the original layout of 6 palace compounds into 4, therefore breaking the shape of the symbolic trigram. The eastern and western sides of the inner court were reserved for the retired emperor and empress dowager. The Emperor Qianlong built his post-retirement palace, the Hall of Pleasant Longevity, in the northeast corner of the Forbidden City. It was the last major construction. The Hall of Supreme Harmony housed the throne of the emperor. This is where ceremonies for the winter solstice, New Year, and Emperor's birthday were performed. The hall and its buildings behind it were elevated on a 3-level white marble platform with sloping stairways, yellow glazed tiles. These are only for the imperial structures. It has a double layered roof, as you can see here, which represents the highest construction rank in the whole empire, thus exclusively for the emperor. The Grand Hall is the largest wooden structure in the world. No building in Beijing was allowed to be higher than it during the Ming and Shang dynasties. There are many marble dragon heads with open mouths. These were used to move water. So yellow is the color of the emperor. Thus, almost all roofs in the Forbidden City bear yellow glazed tile. There are only 2 exceptions. The library at the Pavilion of Literary Profundity has black tiles because black was associated with water and thus fire prevention. Similarly, the Crown Prince's residences have green tiles because green was associated with wood and growth. The sloping ridges of building roofs are decorated with lines of statuettes, from a man riding a phoenix to an imperial dragon. The number of statuettes represented the status of the building. A minor building might have 3 or 5. The Hall of Supreme Harmony has 10, the only building in the country to be permitted this in imperial times. So here we have a close-up and we can see the yellow tiles, and we can also see the statues right there on the eaves. You can also see these dragons, these dragon heads, and how they are moving water so that no area gets flooded. And there is a close-up of what these would look like. Some more images. So technically these are pagodas. Pagoda's a tower with multiple eaves that originated with the Southeast Asian stupa. Again, more of these details. We've got the dragons, four-clawed imperial dragons. So this is Lion Grove Garden. So the imperial family seldom left the palace, so the gardens was their only view of nature. Everything was brought in. We have rugged trees, rocks. It's meant to be walked through. You become part of the environment. This represents the Taoist paradise called the Isles of Immortals. So the Lion Grove Garden was built in 1342 during the Yuan dynasty by a Zen Buddhist monk, Wen Tianru, in memory of his teacher, Abbot Zhongfeng. At the time, the garden was part of the Bodhi Orthodox monastery. The name of the garden is derived from the lion-shaped Taihu rocks, which were in turn built as a reference to the symbolic lion in the Lion's Roar Sutra. The name also refers to the lion peak of Mount Tianmu in Lian City, where Abbot Zhongfeng attained nirvana. At the time, the garden was covered in rock and bamboo. Unfortunately, after Wen Qianru's death, the garden fell into disrepair, but in 1589 another Buddhist monk, Mingjing, rebuilt the garden. The magistrate bought the garden and his son Huangzi rebuilt the garden in 1771. The garden's name was then changed to the Garden of Five Pines. Unfortunately, by 1850 it had fallen into disrepair once again. In 1917, Bei Runsheng purchased the garden and finished the restoration in 1926. Many of the buildings and rocks have been preserved since this time. According to official signs posted in the garden, the Bei family donated the garden to the Chinese government in 1949. The words on the sign seem curious because all private property was nationalized by the Communist Party in that same year. The garden was not open to the public until 1956. Many artists have visited this garden throughout the years. There are 22 buildings in this garden, as well as 25 tablets, 71 stelas, 5 carved wooden screens, 13 ancient specimen trees. The garden is most famous for its elaborate grotto of Taihu rocks. Contains a maze of 9 paths winding through 21 caves across 3 levels. Here's some close-ups of the garden. So you can see some of the buildings and the rocks. So you're meant to be walking through and interacting with these gardens. Here's the famous rocks. This is a landscape by Ch4. He was a member of the Ming royal house. He narrowly avoided catastrophe in 1644 when the Ming dynasty fell to the invading Manchurians. Ch4 became a Buddhist monk at an early age. He moved to Beijing in 1690 to find patronage for his promotion within the monastic system. Frustrated by his failure to find a patron, he converted to Taoism in 1693 and returned to Yangzhou, where he remained until his death in 1707. He saw ancient styles more as a knowledge to be expanded upon than as a material to be exploited. His innovation included drawing attention to the act of painting itself through the use of washes and bold impressionistic brushstrokes that you can see here. Also, his use of white space is wonderful. So we have these very loose impressionistic brushstrokes, the use of white space to show distance. We have a little temple there hidden amongst the rocks.